So we're here at Maidstone Museum where the Maidstone United football exhibition opened. The curator, John Bunyard, is here with us. John, this has been years in the planning, so many hours of work you put into it. How do you feel now it's open and people can come in and see what you've put together?
Well, I suppose the first word that springs to mind is exhausted. And it's been a relief actually to get it started because just yesterday for the first time I was able to look around and think, hey, I've got some spare time, what do I fancy doing? But in reality it's marvellous because it was a dream 2 years ago and I couldn't imagine it would ever come to fruition, but here we are and people are coming and they're looking at it and saying, I love it.
What was the motivation? What was it, is this a drink down the pub one night and then you go, actually, I think I'm going to do this? What was kind of your eureka moment, I suppose, where you said, oh, I actually want to do this?
Well, it really started at the museum a couple of years ago on a visit when I said to staff it was a pity that Maidstone United, which means so much to so many of us and has done for so long, Maidstone was represented by one single picture of Ted Winter, who's been dead for 20 years. And to my surprise, the staff said, well, we would love to have a special exhibition on Maidstone United, but we don't know anything about football. Could you do it for us? So I thought, why not?
And I suppose the quite unique thing about this exhibition is, a Maidstone United fan will love this and will get lost in it for, well, I think a good couple of hours potentially here. But it also looks at how the town itself, the borough itself, has had an influence in our national game.
Yes, indeed, and that really was one of the most surprising things. It's been a voyage of discovery, this whole process. But at the beginning, I thought we really need to say something about things that Maidstone has innovated. There's got to be one thing. Well, I thought of one thing, and then doing a bit more research, I discovered another, and then somebody else told me about a third. And eventually, I had to close the book because there were just so many areas in which Maidstone has been very inventive. In fact, I'm going to be doing a special talk in November on that subject. There seems to be something in the water around here that, in respect of football and sport generally, in Kent and in particular in Maidstone, we've been responsible for a heck of a lot of new stuff that has really advanced the game. And we're still doing it today with 3G.
In terms, obviously, when you embark on this, there's obviously, I guess, lots of sources for the information, but a truly good exhibition needs good material, and you've been particularly blessed with people that have loaned you items to put on display here for the next 3 months.
Well, that's right. I got off to an excellent start because I happened to be friends with Ben McGannon. About 20 years ago, Jim Thompson sold him his own private collection, lock, stock and barrel, for no reason that I can see other than that he didn't want it to get broken up and sold off and the rest put in a skip. Ben very kindly gave me access to it, provided that I do an inventory for him. And it was a gold mine. And of course, as a fan, I was looking at all this stuff saying, well, this is amazing. Everyone I know at the ground would absolutely love this. And that alone has made the journey worthwhile. On top of that, what I've done repeatedly over this period is been introduced to others who've had items that we've been able to borrow, some of which are really quite spectacular and very important to the club, including one or two you can see over my shoulder here. So at the end of the day, we went from having me scraping around thinking, hey, what can we do to fill this place, to having so much material that we were really able to pick and choose. So I think now there's no exhibit here that doesn't really punch its weight.
Fans of yesteryear will remember the name Dave Sadler, and you're very lucky to have some items of his on display here.
We are indeed. Dave Sadler was a great old favourite of mine. In fact, my brother-in-law used to play with him at the Boys Tech, so he's always been special. Of course, he was an amazing goal scorer, even at 15 and 16 for Maidstone United, and went on to be a giant of the game and helped Manchester United win the European Cup in 1968. I was lucky enough to be able to make contact with Dave, and he's been a real supporter of the project all the way through, and it's just very sad that he's now very ill. But I would hope that he's made of tough stuff, and I'm hoping that he'll still be able to get here. As far as exhibits are concerned, we've been able to commemorate Dave's tremendous contribution to Maidstone football by showing the actual kit he wore that night in May 1968 when Man United beat Benfica 4-1, and he was playing alongside the likes of Best, Charlton and Law, and pulled it off. Made us all very proud, and by courtesy of a man called John Wallace, who used to be chairman of Margate, but has subsequently been a director of Folkestone and Victor. Through his generosity, we've managed to be able to display that kit, and I think it's a real highlight of the show.
Now, when the Gallagher Stadium opened in 2012, we were very, very lucky because almost like a new audience discovered Maidstone United and have followed the considerable ups and those few downs in the last 7-8 years. For them, though, there's a whole history pre the Gallagher Stadium, isn't there? And I guess, what would your message be to those that are perhaps more recent to the club? What will they discover about Maidstone United from back in the day?
Well, it was funny that earlier on in the project, somebody actually took me aside and said, "John, if you're doing this museum exhibition, don't do any of this old stuff. You know, people don't want to hear about history. You know, they want to know about the present." Well, given that it is a museum, I thought if there's no place for history there, well, we're a bit stuck. But what I have to say is that having now put together the whole story, going back, in fact, ultimately to the 1870s, if you want to trace Maidstone football back to its origins, it's a fantastic story, because what you realise at every stage is that these are just young men playing football, just as our heroes do today, except 100 years ago. They wore different shirts, they had different hairstyles, and they might have had silly moustaches, but they were really just like our players today, and so too were the fans. It's the same sort of passion that we have today was there then. And so, of course, if you tap into this, you get so many great news stories and poignant ones too. Of what we don't even think about today is what war does to people. But what's happened in Maidstone is an incredible story, and I think that you'd have to be quite short-sighted not to be interested in what's happened over the last 130 years.
And the good thing about this as well is that this is really an exhibition the whole family can enjoy. I mean, I've seen the activity books for the children. There's a place where they can have their photos taken in amongst some retro shirts. So every age group is catered for here, aren't they?
Well, that's exactly right. And again, this is part of my learning curve. When I began, I just had typical Maidstone United fans in mind. But the longer it went on, the more you realise that Maidstone United is rooted in something much bigger, which is the whole Maidstone community of football lovers, which of course includes the Maidstone District League and the Sunday League and so on. And so once you start delving deeper, you realise what a great and rich story it is, and that makes it much broader than just typical Maidstone United fans. One of our sponsors, Golding Vision, is particularly keen on developing sustainable communities, and education is a major part of that. So with their very generous help, we've been able to create a whole series of materials that will enable children not only to have fun, but also learn a bit. And I do think that history is a great tool for teaching us lessons so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past.
You mentioned one of the sponsors there. Of course, you've been particularly lucky to get some key sponsors on board there to help make this wonderful exhibition happen.
Well, indeed, another, as well as Golding Vision, is Gullans, the solicitors, and I was delighted as well when I first met Blair Gulland that he told me all about a project they have at the moment to try to draw town centre businesses together, pulling in the same direction for Maidstone, which is a wonderful throwback, funnily enough, to what used to happen in the Victorian era. So I could hardly believe my ears when I heard this. So that was great. I have to also mention our old friends iMusk, who have been very generously supporting one particular part of the project, which is the book we've put together to go alongside it. And Tim Murrell, who runs iMusk, has been helpful in all sorts of different ways. The last I have to mention is Gordon Wallace, who not only lent us the Dave Sadler kit and a number of other wonderful exhibits, he also, I have to say, was quite outraged when I mentioned that it's standard for the museum to charge to special exhibitions. He wouldn't have it. He insisted that people should be able to get there free and asked me to inquire of the museum what it would take for them to waive charges, and he has footed the bill for us all to visit as often as we like, free of charge, which I think is a most wonderful philanthropic gesture.
Like I say, it would have been such a shame. I mean, it would have perhaps not put everyone off, but it obviously is a barrier. So I mean, that's an absolutely remarkable gesture, isn't it?
Well, that's the whole point. I think of a lot of us who, if you can afford a season ticket, you're going to think, well, a few pounds, what's that? It's a lot more just to go to the cinema. But there are people, including children, for whom any amount of money asks a question. I think if we can take that question away, you can go there because the doors are open to you, and this real Aladdin's cave is available to you for free. I mean, what's not to like?
Now, finally, let's end on this book, because this is kind of like the legacy of this project. I remember when you said, I'm doing a booklet about the exhibition, that we were expecting perhaps an A5 pamphlet running maybe to 8 or so pages that might look at key exhibits, and then this 250-page book arrives, and we were just so amazed, so taken aback. But it's going to be a phenomenal souvenir, isn't it, for this exhibition and the club and the town's football legacy.
Well, that's very kind of you to say so, Ian, and I do hope so. It was so much work that I will not mind a moment of it if people get a lasting benefit from the book. It only happened really by accident, as some of my friends will tell you. I was saying for a year or more, I'm not doing a book. It's too much. This project is already big enough. But we got to May, with only less than 4 months to go, and it became evident that we just had far too much material to fit into the museum space. It ended up on my cutting room floor, and I just thought that's a tragedy. If after all this, the fans don't get that definitive history of Maidstone football they've been promised for so long, then I'm letting them down. So with a man called John Devlin, who's very handily a football book designer who is based in Springfield House, amazingly, we just said, oh, what the hell, let's go for it. And somehow or other, I really don't know how, but it's probably something to do with all the 4 o'clock bedtimes I have for a long time. But we've actually managed to get it finished and printed on time, and I'm delighted that Maidstone United have given us their full backing, as throughout this project, I will say, and we'll be stocking it at the Gallagher Stadium shop as from this Saturday.